This week at Seasons Art, we're using these great skin tone colours to illustrate a chef for our oil pastel week. So begin sketching out your chef using a very neutral coloured oil pastel. So here we're using the olive brown. So start from the shape of the head, and I'm going to break it into very simple shapes. I can't see the whole head because he's wearing a chef's hat. So I'm roughly going to gauge the tilt of the head by putting in a soft angle, which is the midsection for the face, and the base of the chef's hat. I'm going to put in a soft line that's roughly parallel to the midpoint of the face, but where the front plane of the face meets the side plane of the head. So I'm going to pop that guide in. I'm going to place in a soft oval for his ear, and that brings me down into his neckline. Perpendicular to the midsection, middle line for the face, I'm going to put in the brow line, and then from the brow line I'm going to put in the base of the nose, and then underneath his nose the soft shape of his moustache, bottom lip, and the base of the beard. And the chef's hat just tucks in behind the side plane of his face. I'm going to just reposition that ear so it's further back because I need a deeper depth to the side plane of the head. So when you're drawing the basic shape of the head, you need to get the height in relationship to its width. Then I'm going to drop in his shoulders. So on the left, the neckline comes below the ear, and then the shoulders come across. And then I'm going to translate that line across the mouth, and where it exits the side of the beard, that's where the shoulder begins on the right hand side. Popping a soft diagonal. He's got a button on the left, and I'm going to put in some of the creases of his jacket as the garment fits around his form. Another button on the right, then sketching his hand that is reaching across while he's preparing food. So sighting the hand in relationship to the head, it's roughly from the base of the beard to the top border of the chef's hat. So I know from the wrist, that's going to bring me to his middle finger. So it's just making sure that you've got everything in proportion. So sighting is quite key. We know that the top of the head is roughly here, and the chin sits slightly above the base of the beard. So you know then that the eyes are going to be halfway. And then looking at the negative shapes between the fingers and simplifying the hand into shapes of light and dark. The shoulder drops down into the top cuff of his sleeve on the right arm, and a slight curve for the forearm. I'm going to place in soft ellipse for a bow, putting in another ellipse for the pizza cutter in his hands. And to balance out the ellipse of the pizza cutter and the pizza, I'm going to put another bow here to break up that straight edge. So we're working on black oil pastel paper, and we're then ready to plan our highlights. Next, I'm going to half close my eyes and look where the highlights are in the page. So before we even apply any colour, we're going to work monochromatically. So bringing out the light edges into the chef's hat. So I'm breaking it down into light and dark shapes. And then the side plane of his face that cuts along the side of his sideburns into his beard. So bringing out the highlights, side plane of his cheek. And there's a small amount of highlight on his top lid, base of his earlobe, looking at the highlighted shapes of the side of the ear, keeping the shapes simple. The back of the neck, there's a small amount of light, so I'm going to use less pressure on the bottom lid of his eye. And the side plane of his nose is very distinctive. And this is very similar to the technique that we use for the teacup. So looking at the shape where the side nostrils highlighted and bringing that into the tip of the nose, and that gives me the overall side plane shape of the nose. So there's a small amount of light catching the base of his moustache that sits along the top of his top lip, and there's a small amount of light just catching the bottom lip. I'm just going to refine that shape a little bit more and using the eraser to refine the shapes. There's one or two highlights on his beard, and then the top left shoulder of his chef's jacket. There's a tiny amount of light just catching the top right of the shoulder and the crease of the lapel of the jacket. When you're doing your highlights, remember that you can increase and decrease the pressure. So where the highlights are stronger, you're going to apply a lot more pressure. There's a highlight along the top left leading edge of the button on the jacket, and a bit of a highlight on the top of the collar underneath the beard. So looking at the highlight on the arm, so I'm going to scumble that in. I'm not going to apply too much pressure and allow the grain of the paper to scumble through. And then it's slightly stronger along the leading edge of his knuckles. And then the light's just catching the side of his fingers. And just picking out some of these areas of highlight on the fabric of his chef's coat. I want to bring some contrast into the background. So what I'm noticing with my reference picture, the light is slightly darker in relationship to the chef on that top left shoulder. However, by the time we move across to the right hand side of our picture, the background is lighter in contrast to the darker arm. So I'm just going to put in some ambiguous shapes of light and dark, and that will help to profile his right arm. And I'm lightening the negative shape between his arm and his hand. And I'm going to use some rolling technique to suggest ingredients in the bowl. And I'm going to place a highlight on the edge of the pizza cutter. And again, I'm going to use some rolling technique, varying my mark making for the top of the pizza. Next, I'm going to bring some warm skin tones into our chef's portrait. So to begin with, I'm going to use the pale orange into the lighter fleshy parts of his skin, because we need to make it a different colour to the white of his chef coat and hat. And you can use a combination of the broad side of your oil pastel, or you can feather over the top of the initial planned highlights of the previous layer. So I'm just using a combination of feathering this pale flesh colour for the skin that's highlighted. For the arm areas, I'm using much broader strokes. And where the skin tone is in shadow, I'm going to feather in burnt sienna. And then where there's more of a mid-tone in the shadow areas, I'm going to use the raw sienna. Where the beard and sideburns are highlighted, I'm going to feather in the olive brown. Now, where the beard round to the right hand side of the head is in shadow, I'm going to start to deepen the brown using the Van Dyke brown. So the colours are becoming richer and darker. And then taking my white oil pastel, I'm going to feather in different directions with the white, the soft folds of the chef's hat. I'm going to add touches of cerulean blue for the shadows into the chef's hat and coat, and then overlay with the white. And by layering the white over the blue, I'll get this pale, almost blue-grey colour, because I've got the black of the paper scumbling through and I have the white scumbling over the ultramarine. And you can mix in violet along with the ultramarine blue for the shadow areas of the chef's hat. I'm going to bring a bit of contrasting colour against the cool hues of the chef's hat. So some of the crimson red and touches of burnt sienna. And I'm going to do a little bit of blending to soften the background. Using Sienna Natural over the pale orange and white, and bringing more of that on the under part of his arm that's in shadow. And then bringing in some of the salmon pink to blend the lighter and mid-tones of his arm and hand. So bringing that pale salmon over the highlights on the side of the fingers. And touches of the burnt sienna into the skin tone that's in shade. So his right arm is quite dark. There's a little bit of a highlight just catching the top of his forearm, but not much. And where you've got the bridge of his nose as a mid-tone, bringing in some stronger burnt sienna. And just across the top of his brow line as well. Some burnt sienna into his bottom lip, and slightly where the light's catching his top lip. I'm just going to use some of that stronger natural sienna as a contrasting colour in behind the chef to help profile him out. And just bring a little bit of that similar colour into the background above his left shoulder. I'm going to bring some of that red in as well. And some violet. I'm going to take the very dark sepia brown, and where I have the darkest values for the chef's top lid and his brow line and underneath his nostril and the right hand side of his moustache and the right hand side of his beard. I'm going to make that quite a bit darker. So I'm using a short stroke technique, and also going to define the curved line where the top lip meets the bottom lip. So remember, the mouth opening, whether it's open or closed, is always the darkest part of the mouth. And also using the sepia brown underneath the bottom lip, I'm going to increase that shadow. And there's a slither of reflected light along the leading edge of his nose on the right hand side. Just bringing some more definition into the side of the ear. I'm going to work more with the olive brown, using the short stroke technique, into the side of the beard that is highlighted, and where the cheek is pale, using the salmon and pale orange to blend that in. And there's tiny touches of highlights, either at the top of the lip, or touches on the bottom lip, or parts of the beard, touch of the burnt sienna mixed with the Van Dyke Brown for the top lip. So it's slightly darker than just the burnt sienna on the bottom lip. Where the chef's coat is in shadow, I'm going to scumble a pale layer of the ultramarine blue over the black pastel paper. And then taking the violet, I'm going to break that blue up with accents of the violet to create shades of blue violet. And these cool colours work beautifully with the warm skin tones. I'm then ready to of the white to increase the light value of the chef's coat that's in highlight. I'm going to use the Van Dyke Brown and hatch over the burnt sienna on that arm that's slightly darker, and then taking some white oil pastel, and where the chef's coat is subtly lighter in the shadow areas, I'm going to use very, very soft pressure over those areas. I don't want it to be too light because it's in shadow. It's going to be a lot more subtle than the highlights that are on the left-hand side of the body. And I'm going to use tiny accents of black into the seam of the jacket and into the darker folds underneath the armpit and along the cuff of the sleeve of the arm that's in shadow. I'm going to bring a tiny amount of black into the base of the beard and along the right hand side that's in shadow. That will give me lovely contrast, and just a touch into the corner of his mouth as well, and a tiny amount into his eyelashes and a smidge into his brow line, touch into his nostril. You can use a blending stick if you need to refine any edges. I'm going to hatch with the salmon pink along the top of his forearm to bring definition. And to build the skin tone into his limbs. It will be slightly darker where it hits the black pastel paper, and where it hits the white it's going to take on a lighter tone. I'm going to bring the background colour right up to the top leading edge of the hand. And where the knuckles show the difference between the plane of the beginning of the fingers compared to the plane of the top of the hand, the light changes. So I'm going to use the burnt sienna for that plane of the hand that's in shadow. I'm going to use the sepia brown just to darken the underside of the arm, and use some feathering to graduate the dark tone into the mid-tone. So sepia, and then feathering into some burnt sienna. And it darkens ever so slightly along the top of the arm, so bringing in some of the burnt sienna again. Now you notice with the plane of the arm, it's underneath, I've curved and contoured the strokes and they're a little bit more upright. But then as I use the feathering technique along the top of the arm, I'm changing their direction to suggest a top plane and direction of that part of the arm. So you can imagine the arm is a bit like a cylinder, so as it sweeps around, it comes across and down. Keep building your skin tone colours. And then I'm going to use the blending stick to shape the knuckle to show where the light catches along the top. Bringing some of the salmon pink into his nails and nail bed. And there's a little bit of a reflected light on the under part of the bent fingers. bring some colour into the food that the chef is preparing. So where I've got some silver and chrome, I'm using the ultramarine blue over the white and touches of the Naples yellow as well. Using the side of the oil pastel, contouring my lines and using the broad stroke as well and keeping it quite sketchy. The handle of the pizza cutter is very dark, so that will help to define the fingers that sit on top of the handle and just darkening those negative spaces between the fingers. A little bit of a highlight in the handle where the light is catching. This could be some dough mix that sits in bowls, so I'm going to use a bit of the yellow ochre and then use some contoured hatching where the light is catching, bringing contrast of value. Bring in some olive brown as well and some sepia brown for pockets of shadow. Blending those neutral colours where I've got ochre and where the light's just catching the top leading edge of that ball, I'm going to increase that white. And then layering back in with the white, some contoured hatching. Anything that's chrome will pick up colours that are in the objects next to it. So I'm using pockets of violet and burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, making sure I've got a combination of cool and warm colours within the metal. And to finish off, we're going to bring colour into the pizza. So I'm going to begin with some strong reds in between the negative shapes of the highlights that I've already laid down. And then I'm going to break in between with accents of the strong cadmium orange, and then using the Van Dyke brown where those pockets are darkest on the pizza. And then I'm going to use the Naples yellow for the melted cheese on the top, and I'm applying the marks over the top of the planned highlights so that they really contrast well against the slightly darker colours of the crimson red and the Van Dyke brown, and using a combination of hatching and rolling. I'm going to bring some ochre into the crusty base and a smidge of the black to give the edge of the pizza a little bit more definition. And your impressionistic portrait of your chef using oil pastels is now complete. And thank you for watching.